Good afternoon, everyone. Can someone tell me whether my voice is clear and is this screen clear? Okay. So this will be a brief session. Okay. In the previous budget class, we've completed almost everything. Okay. Some of the most trivial thing remains. Okay. So this statement, not only the fiscal policy statement, but even the fiscal strategy and macroeconomic statement. Both of these statements, as we have already discussed, that these statements the finance minister has to present under Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. So this act mandates the government to put out these statements also. Okay. So there is a sum of a history or some of the features regarding FRBM Act also mentioned in the budget document, in which if you read this, it tells you that Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act promotes or at least pushes government to primarily focus upon fiscal consolidation. That means reducing their debt so that they can finance their expenditure. Okay, and let alone the fiscal position of the government should be remaining in the control and should not go out of control. And that and how do we make sure, or how do we provide some quantifiable measure to the government that you need to do these things in order to achieve fiscal consolidation? So the FRBM Act also specifically mentions about that. So it says that fiscal deficit must be 3% of GDP by the 31st March 21. But because, as we all know, because of COVID-19, such target was not able to achieve. So there is also one clause of force majeure, in which the deviations under Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act are allowed if whatever a calamity like situation happens in the country. Similarly, apart from fiscal deficit, there were targets regarding government debt also. Okay, it said that central government should aim for controlling the debt up to 40% of GDP, and state government should aim for 20% of GDP. Okay, and overall government should be 60% of GDP, and this that they need to achieve via 31st March 2025. Okay, these fiscal deficit we've already seen. Next, the government talks about GDP and growth projections. So the data they have took not only from domestic agencies such as NSO, but even they have took data regarding various international agencies and their projections. ठीक है, तो what does it tell you? तो जितने भी projection government ने utilize किए, especially in order to tell that how Indian economy will be flourishing in the future. So all those organizations become important. Organizations report regarding India's economic prospects. Those things also become important. ठीक है, तो फिर उन्हें भी याद करना है. Just like how NSO says that GDP is projected to grow at 7.3%. Even Reserve Bank of India in December Monetary Policy Committee increased the growth rate to 7% for 23-24. And if you see the nominal GDP, the government says that it mostly will be increased by 10.5%. इसमें तो inflation का context भी रहता है. So that's why the rate is higher. Then the government utilized, as you can see, IMF World Economic Outlook, which talked about India's growth projection increased from 6.1% to 6.3%. ठीक है? Similarly, other agencies, for example, World Bank, IMF, OECD, Asian Development Bank, all of their growth projections are also mentioned under the budget document. ठीक है, तो इनको भी याद करके रखना, 6.4, 6.3, 6.1 and 6.7 respectively. Then this is also important that government's borrowings, lending and investments, ठीक है, in this context it talks about India's debt management strategy. ठीक है, it is based on 3 pillars: low cost borrowing, risk mitigation and market development. तो लो कॉस्ट बोरोइंग आपको पता ही है कि पैसा होना है, चीप इंटरेस्ट रेट पे उठाना है, जितने कम से कम एक्सटर्नल से जितना कम से कम उठाएंगे दैट विल बी बेटर. इफ यू नो व्हाई गवर्नमेंट हैव वेरी लेस अमाउंट ऑफ एक्सटर्नल कमर्शियल बोरोइंग इन इट्स debt, because as all of you know, there is a currency exchange rate risk associated with external borrowings. If rupee gets depreciated, naturally, you know, the loan they have to repay, that will be higher, because the dollar, you know, will get appreciated and you will have to pay more rupee to convert it into dollar and then repay the loan. If they specifically ask you with respect to, see, if they specifically, up to latest आ ही जाएगा, you know, this is the projection that the IMF released in June, ठीक है. If they specifically ask you about IMF, they will give you in which report, June report or the later report. And if they ask you regarding what did the, you know, Honorable Finance Minister mentioned about growth projection specifically of IMF, so they will give you specific item. They will not keep it ambiguous. Okay, it will not be like कि they'll ask you IMF projection बताओ, ऐसे नहीं पूछेंगे, वो बोलेंगे 2023-24 in the February report what was it. Okay. So the government's medium-term debt management strategy is based on all those 3 pillars: low cost borrowing, okay, that's why you see, this is what I was talking about. Whenever we have less external debt, it reduces interest rate risk by keeping, you know, and it also manages foreign currency risk by issuing debt in domestic currency. मान लो अगर बाहर से उठाना भी है पैसा, तो इफ यू कैन, यू नो, इशू बॉन्ड्स इन द फॉरेन मार्केट बट दोज आर डिनोमिनेटेड इन रुपी, तब तो फायदा है, बिकॉज यू डू नॉट हैव टू कन्वर्ट योर, यू नो, लेट्स से डेट रीपेमेंट इनटू डॉलर. अगर कन्वर्ट नहीं करना है और आपको पता है कि रुपी की वैल्यू आगे जाके, यू नो, रिड्यूस हो जाएगी, तो नेचुरली इट बेनिफिट्स द government. But if rupee value gets depreciated and your loan is denominated into dollar, then you will have to repay the principal in a large amount. ठीक है? Yes, correct. Masala bonds. So for the previous financial year, the external debt to GDP ratio was 2.7%. These are very important statistics. And right now, external debt is at 15,592 crores, okay, and has a share of 0.9% in budget estimates of financial year 24-25 fiscal deficit. The weighted average maturity of primary issuance of dated securities in previous financial year as of January has increased to 17.93 years. So basically government, as all of you know, releases treasury bills, dated securities, that means long term government securities. अब उसमें 10 साल की भी होती हैं, 15 साल की भी होती हैं, 30 साल की भी होती हैं, ठीक है। लोग जिसको सबसे ज़्यादा सब्सक्राइब करते हैं उसका अगर एवरेज निकालें हम लोग तो ये मैच्योरिटी निकल के आ रही है, ठीक है। These are the strategic priorities of the government, ठीक है, and this will help you especially in context of descriptive paper, because you will get to understand what are the major themes upon which the government is focusing upon. So as you can see, the primary thing is they want to develop domestic economy as an inclusive, sustainable and resilient one. Okay, then they are focusing upon capital spending to sustain infrastructure development. So capex is another very important aspect in strategy of the government. Then they focus on fiscal federalism. That means money provided to states also for infrastructure development, public infrastructure. ठीक है. Then focusing upon approach utilized in Gati Shakti, which is of whole of government approach in especially infrastructure development. Okay, then prioritizing expenditure towards key development areas, which is drinking water, housing, sanitation, green energy, health, education. तो इसमें आ क्या रहा है basically social, green infrastructure, ठीक है, and enhancing the effectiveness of cash management through just-in-time release of resources by single nodal agency. ठीक है, जितना भी कैश गवर्नमेंट डिप्लॉय कर रही है फॉर इम्प्लीमेंटेशन ऑफ वेरियस स्कीम्स एंड इनिशिएटिव्स, तो उसका डिप्लॉयमेंट इन एन इफेक्टिव मैनर विदाउट एनी लीकेजेस, दिस इज व्हाट द एम इज. ठीक है, एंड नाउ कंक्लूजन ऑफ द बजट. The aim is simple. They want to, develop an economy that can sustain economic shocks. And the most important thing, the fiscal policy stance in budget estimate 24-25 is twofold. First, to provide positive impulse to the growth environment, and second, to make the domestic economy more resilient to global headwinds. ठीक है, तो गवर्नमेंट दोनों तरीके से देख रही है. पहली बात तो दे आर ट्राइंग टू इंश्योर दैट द ग्रोथ एनवायरमेंट गेट्स positively impacted, and that can only be possible if you provide a working environment in which startups flourish, in which businesses flourish, in which even employees flourish via skill development and all those things. All the services becomes much more efficient, whether you develop it through infrastructure development or whether you do it through वेरियस अदर टाइप्स. ठीक है, तो ये तो हो गया आपको ग्रोथ एनवायरमेंट ठीक करना. देन अनदर थिंग इज टू मेक डोमेस्टिक इकोनॉमी मोर रेजिलिएंट टू ग्लोबल शॉक्स. सो वन ऑफ द मोस्ट प्राइम एग्जांपल इज, एज यू सी, दैट एक्सटर्नल डेट एज परसेंटेज ऑफ फिस्कल डेफिसिट, टोटल फिस्कल डेफिसिट इज वेरी लो, less than 1% also. So that is a criteria for making our economy less, let's say, vulnerable to global shocks. Because even if global, financial instability happens, that will not be, or the impact will be much less to us as compared to other countries who have taken more loans, especially if they are denominated in external currencies. So these two types, or these two areas, is the fiscal policy stance of the government for next year. Okay, and then they talk about augmented capex plan, which has a multiplier effect. Naturally, if you will develop the infrastructure in the economy, this will improve logistics, it will reduce time, it will reduce cost of every industry. So that's why we say such type of infrastructure development has multiplier effect on different sectors in the economy. Okay? Then we have defense. So defense continues to remain the ministry having most budget allocation. In the previous year also, if you remember, around 5 point something lakh crore, allocation was done in the financial year 23-24. And for the next financial year, which is 24-25, the government has allocated 6,21,540 crore rupees. Okay? And this comes out to be 13.04% of union budget. And obviously it is higher because not only government is focusing upon capital expenditure in defense, they're focusing upon normal operating expenses, then pensions and all those things. As you can see from here, major share is going to capital, then revenue expenditure, for pay and allowances, defense pension and civil organizations under Ministry of Defense. Now this is the main thing that you need to remember. Okay, this is also very important, the allocation of major schemes. Okay, question आएगा ही आएगा. If not directly, it will come in a statement form. So you need to understand especially the most important flagship schemes. So for example, if you look at which scheme has the highest allocation, you will realize that Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana has the highest allocation of 2 lakh crores. Okay? And then you have MG Narega having 86,000 crores. Okay? Jal Jeevan Mission 70,000 crores. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana 80,000 crores. Okay? At least remember the schemes having allocation more than 50,000 crores. Those are the most prominent schemes that you should keep in mind. Okay? तो ये आप सब याद कर लेना. Based on allocation, you can see here is the order, ministry wise also. The Ministry of Defense has the highest, then Ministry of Road Transport, Railways, Consumer Affairs. ठीक है, तो order wise ये पढ़ा हुआ है. Please remember the top 5 ministries at least. और इसमें ये नहीं कि केवल आपको order याद करना है. You also need to remember how much amount is being provided to them. ठीक है, it's a factual examination. They'll definitely ask you these things. And any data presented in the budget, तो वो anyways important हो जाता है. ठीक है, and this data we've already seen that number of enrollments on the Jeevan Jyoti has increased from 17372 to 13195 per lakh population, and a data with respect to percentage of women registered for antenatal care within first trimester, this has also increased from 68 to 89. So what does this tell you? That maternal health care in the country has been improving. Okay? So this is all from my side. Okay? I hope all of you understand what's important and what's not in the budget. ठीक है, मोस्टली तो इम्पोर्टेंट डॉक्यूमेंट रहते ही है, बट एटलीस्ट यू शुड बी अवेयर अबाउट हाउ द एग्जामिनर ट्राइज टू फॉर्म क्वेश्चंस, हाउ द एग्जामिनर ट्राइज टू which things are important and which things are not. If you have any doubt, please ask, otherwise we'll wind up the session. नहीं है? चलो, थैंक यू गाइस फॉर ज्वाइनिंग, विल मीट इन द नेक्स्ट सेशन. ठीक है.